Well, welcome everybody to the next in the webinars that we are doing in conjunction with Auditel and with RAND. This one's going to be about the roadmap to rapid funded decarbonisation, and it'll be given by Paul Foster, who's the principal decarbonisation consultant at Auditel and has over 35 years of experience in business systems, outsourcing, communications, procurement and decarbonisation. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Alan. So I'm going to turn everything on its head here. Everybody talks about scopes 1, scopes 2 and scope 3 operational. And depending on who you're talking to, they say, well, scope 3, yes, we're starting to look at it. It looks like a nightmare. Where do I start? All sorts of questions around that. Most people are not doing a great deal in this space. I'm going to advocate that not only do we start by focusing on this area, but we take a completely different approach to it. And the reason why I'm suggesting this is because if you're looking at where 80% of your carbon emissions are, you're also looking at a huge area for change. And the innovation that you might get involved in through that change would generate R&D tax funding as well. So I'm going to talk about starting at the beginning, really. And starting at the beginning is really understanding your whole scope 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to call it, your carbon emissions in totality. And the reason why we're going to do that is because we're going to focus on the supply chain and buildings and where most of the carbon is. So in anything that you start at the beginning. You gather data, you clean that data, you process that data, you understand what you've got. What are you actually doing at the moment? We start with a baseline, but instead of focusing purely on the carbon, we look at the spend analysis in terms of what you are actually procuring and from where, and we review the supply chain, what suppliers are you using and where. And the reason for that is that, of course, in some of the other sessions, I've talked about decarbonising buildings, decarbonising products. Well, the same is going to apply to your supply chain. So, if you pick on metals, let's pick on steel or aluminium, you'll find some suppliers will provide that material at over half the embodied carbon of another supplier. So let's start with the supply chain. Let's start with procurement and look at some analysis around that. Now, while we're going through that audit, I guess, we're analysing the supply chain. We're alongside that analysing the carbon. We're benchmarking your costs. And we're looking at the whole cost transformation, the innovation, the cost reduction opportunities. I mean, it's interesting that on some of the other discussions that I've had, I've talked about cost reduction and energy reduction. Energy a few years ago was not that expensive and it didn't really bother most people. And there was very, very little in terms of granular data analysis on consumption and what you were wasting your energy on. Now we've got the ability to go into the detail. We can understand where you're wasting energy. A building in the Irish Republic was recently renovated, refurbished by the Irish government. Not that we were involved, but it caught my eye because they've refurbished it, made a really good story around decarbonisation. But the real killer there is that they've reduced energy consumption in this building by 75%. What would that do to your bottom line? If your energy costs drop by that much, it would make a big, big difference. And by the way, icing on the cake, low carbon products coming out of it. So I'm going to call it cost transformation rather than cost reduction. But, starting with the supply chain, you start with the data, you understand everything a lot better, you audit it, you understand what the costs are, you understand what the carbon emissions are, and then you get into a situation where you focus on the 80-20 rule. Now, you focus on really where most of that carbon is. And our solutions and recommendations will focus on the 80%, not the 10 or 20% that people are focusing on at the moment. And I'm going and talking to some really large consultancies in this country who are saying this is revolutionary. And actually, it's not revolutionary. It's just looking at doing more than just ticking boxes. We live in a world where people are risk averse and all they do is tick boxes. If you want to transform the business that you're in and you want to decarbonise it rapidly and you want to outmaneuver your competition and ultimately you want to mitigate the taxes that are coming down the road, you need to do things this way. So once you get into that tactical implementation, that execution, if you like, you're reducing energy. You're now starting to come up with really good stories on your carbon reporting. Your cost management's improving. Your carbon management by default will improve because of all the things that I've just talked about. And we can start really with some quick wins. And this is really having done all the analysis where we focus on changing what people are doing. We look at procuring things differently. So you've got the R&D tax funding there. You've got the cost reduction. You've got the quick wins in terms of changing the way that you're manufacturing things. You might even make that more efficient. We're working on a project for someone at the moment where they were interested in the energy consumption, but then it became, well, can you actually track the widgets that we're manufacturing off the end of that line as well? So the intelligence that we're putting into this factory environment would, I'm sure, be very useful to people in the aerospace industry. We were wandering around an aerospace event quite recently, in fact, this week, and we saw some fantastic stories in terms of circular economy. The only thing that's missing is the evidence and the accounting. So people are coming across these things and developing solutions, and a lot of these things are common sense. But what you're missing is the ability to evidence what you're doing, and it's the evidence that's going to prevent you paying too much in tax. So once you're getting around that, you've made some quick wins, you've improved some business processes, you've improved policies. Now we can get into the strategic transformation. So we're really looking at, I guess, technology running alongside what we're doing. And what we're doing is joining the dots, but we're also doing all of the carbon reporting and carbon accounting, whole life carbon accounting and chain of custody. So we're tracking where everything is coming. We're evidencing everything. Everything is transparent. New business models will come out of this. I've been talking to people only this week where they're moving away from a linear environment into a circular economy environment. And that means that their whole business model changes. Now, I can give you a few scare stories of where things are changing already that are really purely down to materials, but major contracts in North America are being won and lost because of low carbon steel. And that's a big area. But I'm talking to people about business transformation models, business models that will outmaneuver their competition in a dramatic way. And it'll all be too late by the time they've lost their contract to do whatever it is. So with all of this stuff, let's not forget the fact that we need to monitor, we need to review, we need to report on it. It's the evidence that really matters. If you look at what the EU are doing, they're looking for product verification. The UK are currently talking about something very similar, but they're encompassing it in greenwashing laws and changes there. You need to treat this in the same way as you treat financial accounting. Carbon accounting is no different, and actually it will sit alongside that. In fact, you can see those financial accounting, carbon accounting changes coming down the road now. And if you want to know more about that, obviously happy to help and share that with you. So it is all about embodied carbon. It is all about whole life carbon and chain of custody and evidencing what you're doing and where it's coming from. And ultimately, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to reduce your carbon emissions dramatically between now and 2030, for example. Not promising 50%, but you should be targeting 50%. It's not impossible, but certainly big chunks of carbon emission reduction between now and 2030 are on the table. If you want to know more about this, please contact the FAC or me directly. Thank you for your time.